There is one blood pressure number that becomes dramatically more dangerous after 50. And millions of people keep dismissing it because the other number looks normal. That is the trap. They see a reading like 148 over 72 or 156 over 68, and they tell themselves, well, the bottom number seems okay, so maybe this isn't that serious. And that single misunderstanding is why so many adults walk around with a silent risk building in their arteries, their brain, their kidneys, and their heart without realizing it. I'm Dr. Aliza Wright, and in the next few minutes, I need to show you why one number on your monitor deserves far more attention than most people have ever been told. Before we begin, please subscribe to my channel for clear, life-saving health guidance that helps you protect your heart daily. Now, here is the truth that changes everything after 50. The most dangerous blood pressure number for most people in this stage of life is usually the top number, your systolic pressure. Not because the bottom number never matters, it does, absolutely. But because after 50, the top number becomes a much stronger warning sign of stroke, heart attack, heart failure, kidney damage, and even cognitive decline. And what makes this so deceptive is that it often rises alone. The bottom number may stay normal or even drift lower, while the top number keeps climbing. So people feel reassured by half the reading, while the more dangerous half is quietly getting worse. Let me show you what I mean with Eleanor, because her story explains this better than any textbook ever could. Eleanor was 67, organized, thoughtful, and extremely careful about her health. She had a monitor on her kitchen table, a neat little notebook, and a routine she followed every morning after breakfast. Her readings kept coming back in a range that bothered her, just enough to make her uneasy, but not enough to make her panic. 149 over 74, 152 over 72, 147 over 70. She kept staring at that lower number. 72 isn't bad, she told herself. 70 isn't bad, so maybe this is just age. That sentence nearly cost her far more than she understood, because what Eleanor didn't realize is that after 50, a reading like 152 over 72 can be far more dangerous than many people assume. In fact, that pattern has a name. It is called isolated systolic hypertension. That means the top number is high while the bottom number is still below the usual hypertension cutoff. And this pattern is incredibly common in older adults. Why? Because the blood vessels change with age. The large arteries become stiffer. They lose the easy flexibility they had when you were younger. So every time the heart pumps, the pressure wave hits a less forgiving system. The top number rises. The bottom number may not rise with it. And that creates a dangerous illusion of safety. Let me pause here and make this very simple, because if you understand this one part, the rest of the video is going to click into place. The top number, systolic pressure, tells us how much force is pushing against your artery walls when your heart contracts and sends blood out. The bottom number, diastolic pressure, tells us what that pressure looks like while the heart relaxes between beats. Both matter. Both tell us something important, but they are not equally predictive at every age. And after 50, especially as arteries stiffen, the top number usually tells us more about future cardiovascular danger than the bottom one does by itself. For years, medicine paid much more attention to the bottom number. That older way of thinking shaped how many people still talk about blood pressure today. You still hear it in waiting rooms, in family conversations, even sometimes in advice passed around between friends. The bottom number is the one to worry about. The top number goes up because you're getting older. That's normal for seniors. No. Common is not the same thing as harmless. That old belief stayed around long after better evidence started showing that in adults over 50, the upper number often predicts trouble more clearly, especially when it keeps rising over time or stays high despite normal-looking diastolic readings. And this is where people get misled in a very specific way. They think danger should look dramatic. They think it should feel dramatic. They expect pounding headaches, chest pain, dizziness, something obvious. But high systolic pressure usually does not announce itself like that. It is silent. It can sit there at 145, 150, 158, day after day while you feel mostly normal, go to the grocery store, watch television, call your grandchildren, and make dinner. Meanwhile, every heartbeat is putting extra mechanical stress on vessels that are already aging. Tiny injuries accumulate. Plaque becomes more dangerous. The brain's delicate circulation is affected. The kidneys filter under more strain. The heart muscle has to work against more resistance. Now let me explain why this happens so often after 50, because the biology matters here, and it is actually easier to understand than most people think. When you are younger, your arteries behave more like soft, elastic tubing. They expand when blood is pumped through them, then recoil smoothly. That flexibility cushions the force of each heartbeat. But as the years pass, the artery walls gradually become stiffer. Sometimes it is due to aging alone. Sometimes cholesterol, diabetes, smoking, lack of exercise, inflammation, or long-standing hypertension speed it up. When those arteries stiffen, they do a poorer job absorbing the surge from each beat. So the pressure spike during contraction becomes higher. That is why the top number starts to climb. And here is the part that scares me most when I see patients over 50. Many of them do not ignore their blood pressure completely. That would almost be easier to fix. What they do instead is something far more dangerous. They monitor it, but they interpret it incorrectly. They see 150 over 68 and think only one number is off. They see 144 over 76 and think at least the bottom number isn't high. They see 158 over 70 and think maybe I was just stressed. In other words, they downgrade the risk because the reading looks mixed instead of uniformly bad. And that mistaken reassurance delays action for months, sometimes years. Let me take you back to Eleanor because her story didn't end with a scary number on a home monitor. It ended in an emergency department. One afternoon while folding laundry, she noticed her right hand felt clumsy. Not weak exactly, just strange. Then her speech became slightly off. Not dramatic, not movie-level stroke symptoms. Just enough that her daughter felt something was wrong and called 911. Eleanor had not had a massive, devastating stroke, thank God. But she had a transient ischemic event, a warning shot. And when the team reviewed her blood pressure history, the pattern was there the whole time. High systolic readings for months, reassuringly normal bottom numbers, false comfort, delayed response. That is why I want you to hear this sentence very clearly. After 50, you cannot let a normal bottom number talk you out of taking a high top number seriously. I don't care if the bottom number is 78, 72, or even 66. If the top number is consistently elevated, that is not half normal. That is high blood pressure that may be especially common in aging arteries and especially dangerous when left alone. Too many people think blood pressure works like a school exam, where one good score balances out one bad score. It doesn't work that way. The reading is not averaged into safety. Each number carries its own message, and after 50, the top number often speaks the loudest. So what counts as high? Let's make this practical. A normal reading is below 120 over 80. If your systolic number is 120 to 129 and the bottom stays under 80, that is considered elevated. Once the top number reaches 130 to 139, that falls into stage 1 hypertension, even if the bottom number still looks okay. And once the top number reaches 140 or higher, you are in stage 2 territory, regardless of what the lower number says. That means a reading like 142 over 74 is not almost normal. It is not just a little off. It is a medically meaningful elevation that deserves real attention, especially if it is happening repeatedly. Now let me show you another number that people ignore because it hides inside the two numbers you already know. It is called pulse pressure, and it is simply the gap between the top and bottom numbers. If your reading is 120 over 80, that gap is 40. That is considered normal. But after 50, many people develop a wider and wider gap because the top climbs while the bottom drifts down. So now you get readings like 150 over 70 or 160 over 62. That wide separation can be a sign that the arteries are becoming stiffer and less healthy. It is not the main star of today's video, but it is an important clue that the cardiovascular system is changing in ways you should not dismiss. Let me give you an example that fools people all the time. A man looks at 160/60 and thinks, well, 60 seems low if anything, so maybe I'm fine. No, that reading can be deeply concerning, not reassuring. The issue is not just that the top number is high, it is that the pressure pattern suggests the arteries may be losing flexibility. And when the top number is high while the bottom number is falling, people get confused. They start asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, why is my systolic pressure staying high? They ask, how can I have high blood pressure if my diastolic is low? And that confusion leads them to do nothing. This is also why I need to make one thing very clear. Saying the top number is often the most dangerous after 50 does not mean the bottom number never matters. It absolutely matters. Very high diastolic pressure can still damage organs. Unusually low diastolic pressure can matter too, especially if you feel weak, lightheaded, or if blood pressure treatment is pushing it too low for you. But that nuance should never be twisted into an excuse to ignore systolic hypertension. After 50, the common and dangerous pattern is not always both numbers are terrible. Very often, the danger shows up as a lonely elevated top number that people shrug off as normal aging. And the body does not shrug it off. The brain does not shrug it off. The kidneys do not shrug it off. Your heart definitely does not shrug it off. Every time your heart pushes blood against higher resistance, it has to work harder. Over years, the left side of the heart can thicken. The vessels in the brain can become more vulnerable. The small filtering structures in the kidneys can be injured. The risk of stroke rises. The risk of heart failure rises. The risk of heart attack rises. And what is cruel about all of this is that the person may feel perfectly functional while this is happening. That is why high blood pressure has always been so dangerous. It gives damage time to accumulate quietly. There is another layer to this that almost nobody talks about enough, and it is the morning pattern. Blood pressure is not static. It changes across the day. It often rises in the morning as your body wakes up, stress hormones increase, and your cardiovascular system gears up for activity. In some people over 50, that morning surge becomes exaggerated. So the top number is highest exactly when they first get moving. That means if you already have stiff arteries and borderline control, the most dangerous period may be the very part of the day when you assume everything is routine. You wake up, stand up, walk to the kitchen, start making coffee, and your blood vessels are already under more strain than you realize. Now imagine how many people are missing this. They don't feel sick, they don't see dramatic symptoms, they may only check once in a while, and when they do, they focus on the lower number because that is what they were taught 20 years ago. Or they say, my friend has 90 on the bottom, so mine at 72 can't be that bad. That is not how risk works. Blood pressure risk is not a comparison game with your neighbor. It is a relationship between your arteries, your age, your health conditions, and your long-term exposure to pressure. And after 50, a persistently elevated systolic reading is one of the clearest warnings you can get that your cardiovascular system needs attention. Let me tell you about Robert because his case shows how people accidentally talk themselves out of urgency. Robert was 71 and proud of the fact that he kept up with his yard, carried his own groceries, and still felt younger than most of his friends. His readings were usually around 146/69. His exact words to me were, "I'm not worried because the lower number is excellent." That sentence stopped me cold. Excellent compared to what? His arteries didn't care that the lower number looked nice. His risk was being driven by the upper number. And when we did a proper review, we found he had been running in the mid-140s to low 150s for well over a year. He had been congratulating himself while his actual risk kept rising. This is why the phrase normal for my age can become one of the most expensive lies people tell themselves. Age changes what becomes common. It does not magically make vascular damage safe. Arthritis is more common with age. Cataracts are more common with age. Hearing loss is more common with age. We don't call those harmless just because they are common. The same logic applies to isolated systolic hypertension. It may be very common after 50, 60, and 70, but common does not mean benign. It means you and your doctor need to pay closer attention, not less. If your top number keeps crossing into the 130s and 140s and living there, that deserves action. So what should actually alarm you? Here's the first rule. Don't panic over one random reading taken when you were rushing, stressed, talking, or sitting badly. But do take patterns seriously. If your top number is repeatedly 130 or higher, that matters. If it is repeatedly 140 or higher, that matters even more. If you ever get a reading above 180 systolic or above 120 diastolic, wait a minute, sit quietly.